Raghav and Elena thought their online love story would defy distance. But when he traveled across the world to meet her, he walked straight into a nightmare he could never have imagined. Raghav lived a quiet life in a crowded Indian city where days passed without much change. He worked long hours fixing computer systems and spent most evenings alone in his small rented room. Friends had slowly drifted away, and his family lived far from the city. Loneliness became a normal part of his routine, and the internet turned into his escape. One night, while scrolling through a social media platform, he received a message from a woman named Elena. Her profile showed a cheerful face, gentle eyes, and a life that seemed calm and distant from his own chaos. Their conversations began casually, but soon became the highlight of Raghav's day. Elena spoke about feeling misunderstood and isolated, and Raghav felt a strange connection to her words. She shared photos of her daily life, her home, and peaceful streets, creating an image of comfort and trust. Over time, the messages became longer and more emotional. Raghav started rearranging his schedule just to talk to her at night. He felt seen and valued in a way he had not felt for years. Weeks turned into months, and Elena slowly became the center of his emotional world. She spoke about fate, destiny, and how rare it was to find someone who truly listened. Raghav believed every word. He ignored small doubts, such as her refusal to video call or meet mutual friends online. His heart filled the gaps where logic should have been. Without realizing it, Raghav had placed complete trust in a person he had never met, unaware that this digital bond was leading him toward a dangerous and irreversible path. As the months passed, Elena began to suggest that their connection was too strong to remain only online. She hinted that real love required real effort and spoke often about how meaningful it would be if Raghav visited her. At first, he hesitated, knowing the distance was great and the cost was high. But Elena slowly planted the idea that this journey would prove his commitment. Each message made the trip sound more urgent, as if delaying it would mean losing something precious. Raghav started imagining a new life beyond his narrow routine. The thought of being welcomed by someone who cared for him filled him with hope. He researched flights late at night and checked visa requirements in secret. Elena insisted that the visit should be a surprise, explaining that planning too much would ruin the magic. She discouraged him from telling his family or friends, suggesting they would not understand their bond. This secrecy made Raghav feel chosen, as if he was part of something special. To afford the trip, Raghav made difficult choices. He sold his old motorcycle, dipped into his savings, and borrowed money from co-workers without explaining why. Every sacrifice felt justified because he believed it was for love. The closer the travel date came, the more nervous he became, but Elena's messages always reassured him. She spoke of destiny waiting on the other side of the journey. On the night he booked the ticket, Raghav felt a mix of excitement and fear. He convinced himself that doubts were signs of weakness. With his plans set and his life temporarily abandoned, he stepped forward, unaware that this decision would pull him into a reality far darker than he could imagine. Raghav arrived in the foreign country after a long and exhausting journey that left him disoriented and tense. The airport felt colder and quieter than anything he had known, with unfamiliar signs and hurried faces passing him by. He checked his phone repeatedly, expecting a message or a call, but there was nothing waiting for him. After some time, a short text arrived with an address and instructions to come alone. There was no explanation, only reassurance that everything would make sense soon. Outside, the city felt distant and unwelcoming. Gray skies hung low, and the streets were lined with buildings that looked old and worn. Raghav dragged his suitcase through public transport, struggling to understand directions and announcements spoken in a language he barely recognized. With each stop, his excitement slowly faded, replaced by a tight feeling in his chest. He reminded himself that surprises were part of Elena's nature and tried to stay calm. As he reached the neighborhood, the streets grew narrower and quieter. Few people were around, and the silence felt heavy. The building at the given address stood apart from the others, its windows dark even during the day. Raghav hesitated before entering, noticing peeling paint and a broken intercom. He felt a sudden urge to turn back, but the thought of traveling so far stopped him. Inside, the hallway smelled damp and old. The elevator was out of order, forcing him to climb the stairs slowly with his luggage. By the time he reached the door, His hands were shaking. He stood there waiting, heart pounding, convinced that once it opened, everything he had sacrificed would finally feel worth it. The door opened slowly, and the moment froze Raghav in place. The woman standing there looked nothing like the person he had come to meet. Her body filled most of the doorway, and her breathing was heavy and uneven. She weighed nearly 380 kilograms and struggled to shift her weight even slightly. Raghav's mind raced as he tried to match this reality with the images he had memorized for months, but nothing aligned. The shock drained the strength from his legs, and he stood there unable to move. The apartment behind her was dim and cluttered. Thick curtains blocked out the daylight, and the air felt stale and heavy. The smell of old food and unclean surfaces lingered everywhere. Raghav stepped inside slowly, pulling his suitcase behind him. Every surface seemed crowded with objects, leaving narrow paths through the room. The space felt more like a closed trap than a home. As his eyes adjusted, panic crept in. The photos, the stories, the promises, all collapsed in a single moment. Raghav realized he had been completely misled. His first instinct was to leave immediately, but the door closed behind him with a heavy sound. His phone buzzed briefly and then went silent, the battery drained after the long journey. In that moment, the weight of his situation became clear. The woman moved deeper into the apartment with great effort, and Raghav followed, unsure of what else to do. Fear mixed with disbelief as he tried to understand how such a lie had been maintained for so long. He had crossed countries for a person who did not exist, and now he stood inside a place that felt dangerous and wrong. Realizing his mistake had no simple escape. Within the first day, the truth behind the deception became impossible to ignore. The woman revealed the reality of her life through her actions rather than words. She depended entirely on others for movement, food, and basic needs. Raghav noticed that every part of the apartment had been arranged to keep someone inside for long periods. Heavy locks were fixed on the doors, and thick curtains remained closed at all times. The outside world felt distant and unreachable. Raghav soon understood that his visit was never meant to be temporary. His passport and phone were taken away under the excuse of keeping them safe. Without documents or communication, he was completely powerless. He realized the invitation had been carefully planned, and he had walked into it willingly. What he believed was love had been nothing more than bait. As time passed, Raghav observed strange patterns inside the apartment. Supplies arrived regularly, always left at the door without any interaction. The woman avoided showing her face to neighbors and relied on online services for everything. Raghav was expected to handle all physical tasks, from cleaning to preparing meals. Any delay or mistake brought immediate consequences. Fear settled into his mind as he noticed surveillance cameras fixed in corners of the rooms. Every movement was watched. Attempts to ask for help were quietly shut down. The apartment was no longer just a place of deception, but a controlled environment designed to trap and break someone. Raghav realized he had not been chosen by chance. He was selected because he was alone, far from home, and emotionally vulnerable. The trap was complete. What began as an online fantasy had turned into a calculated imprisonment, and Raghav understood that escaping would require more than hope. Days blended into one another as Raghav's life fell into a dark and exhausting routine. From the moment he woke up until his body gave in to sleep, he was forced to keep moving. Cleaning the apartment took hours because of the clutter and narrow spaces. Preparing food was physically draining, as large quantities were demanded at strict times. Any sign of slowing down was treated as disobedience. Rest was rare, and his body began to ache constantly. The windows stayed covered, making it hard to tell whether it was day or night. Artificial lights remained on at all times, adding to his confusion and fatigue. The cameras in the apartment reminded him that he was never alone, even when no one else was in the room. The feeling of being watched slowly damaged his sense of safety. Privacy no longer existed. Food for Raghav became limited and irregular. He was expected to give priority to others, leaving little for himself. Hunger weakened him, and his clothes started hanging loosely from his frame. His hands developed cuts and infections from constant work and poor hygiene conditions. Without access to medical help, even small injuries became serious problems. Isolation crushed his spirit. There were no conversations, no news, and no connection to the outside world. His thoughts turned dark as hope faded. He began to question whether anyone would ever realize he was missing. The silence inside the apartment felt heavier than the physical labor. Fear became his strongest emotion. He learned to move quietly, follow rules precisely, and suppress any visible emotion. Survival replaced every other thought. Raghav was no longer a visitor or a guest. He had been reduced to a tool, trapped in a place where time, identity, and freedom slowly disappeared. While cleaning one of the storage areas, Raghav noticed items that did not belong to him. At first, they seemed harmless, like extra shoes and jackets pushed into corners. But as he looked closer, unease crept in. The clothes were all different sizes and styles, clearly belonging to different people. Some were folded carefully, others stuffed into bags as if hidden in a hurry. The sight disturbed him deeply. As days passed, he continued to uncover more objects. Old mobile phones with cracked screens were wrapped in plastic and tucked away behind boxes. Several wallets lay empty, their identification cards removed. He found foreign currency from multiple countries and expired travel documents that did not match his own. These discoveries filled him with dread. The apartment no longer felt like a single crime, but part of something much larger. The most terrifying realization came when he found a small notebook buried beneath piles of clutter. Inside were dates, names, and numbers written in an uneven pattern. Some entries were crossed out, while others ended abruptly. Raghav sensed these were not random notes, but records of people who had once stood where he now stood. The absence of any recent entries suggested a pattern that ended badly. The weight of the truth crushed him. He was not the first person to be trapped this way. Others had come with hope, just like him, and vanished without explanation. The silence of the apartment now felt deliberate, designed to erase evidence and memory alike. Fear turned into urgency. Raghav understood that waiting meant becoming another forgotten name. Every sound, every shadow felt threatening. The apartment held secrets that were never meant to be discovered, and now that he had seen them, his situation became even more dangerous than before. The discovery of those hidden items pushed Raghav toward a desperate decision. He began quietly observing the apartment, memorizing routines and searching for weak points. Every movement had to look normal, every task completed without raising suspicion. He noticed a back exit used only for deliveries, blocked by stacked boxes and rarely checked. It became his only possible chance. Fear followed him constantly, but the fear of staying was greater than the fear of trying. Late one night, when the apartment was unusually quiet, Raghav acted. He moved slowly, shifting boxes just enough to reach the door. His hands shook as he struggled with the heavy lock, each small sound feeling unbearably loud. His body was weak from hunger, but adrenaline forced him forward. For a brief moment, the door gave way, and cold air rushed in, filling him with hope. That hope vanished instantly. A sharp alarm echoed through the apartment, triggered by the door's movement. Panic froze Raghav in place. The noise was loud and constant, impossible to ignore. Lights flicked on, and the cameras turned toward the exit. The attempt was over before it had truly begun. He was dragged back inside, his escape crushed within seconds. After that night, everything changed. Raghav was no longer allowed to move freely. He was confined to a small room with barely enough space to lie down. Food was reduced to the minimum needed to keep him alive. The air inside the room was stale, and the darkness felt endless. Time lost all meaning. The failed escape broke something inside him. Hope became dangerous to hold on to. He realized that the apartment was designed to prevent freedom, and any resistance only tightened the control. Survival now depended on enduring, waiting, and somehow staying alive long enough for the outside world to notice his absence. Several days after the failed escape, Raghav's body began to shut down. Extreme hunger, dehydration, and untreated infections left him barely conscious. He could no longer stand without collapsing, and his thoughts drifted in and out of awareness. The small room felt tighter with every passing hour, as if the walls themselves were closing in. His breathing grew shallow, and even simple movements caused pain. Outside the apartment, a small mistake finally disrupted the long pattern of silence. A delivery worker noticed the smell coming from the building and the unusual condition of repeated unattended packages. Reports had been made before, but this time authorities decided to investigate. When they forced entry, what they found revealed years of hidden abuse. Raghav was discovered lying on the floor, dangerously weak and barely alive. Immediate medical help saved him from death. As the apartment was searched, disturbing evidence surfaced. Hidden compartments contained personal belongings belonging to several foreign men. Records showed online profiles linked to false identities, all used to lure victims from different countries. Investigators connected missing persons cases that had gone unresolved for years. Some victims had died from neglect, their disappearances disguised as voluntary travel gone wrong. The scale of the crimes shocked even experienced officers. What appeared to be a single act of deception turned out to be a long-running pattern of manipulation, confinement, and fatal neglect. Raghav's survival became the key that exposed everything. His presence proved that the victims were not myths or rumors, but real people who had trusted the wrong person. As the truth unfolded, the apartment transformed from a private prison into a crime scene. The silence that once protected the crimes was finally broken, ending years of darkness that had gone unnoticed by the world. Raghav's rescue marked the beginning of a slow and painful recovery. He returned to India physically weak and emotionally scarred, carrying memories that haunted him every waking moment. Therapy and medical care helped him regain strength, but the trauma lingered in ways that medicine could not heal. Sleep was a challenge. Nightmares replayed every detail of the apartment, the hidden cameras, and the sense of being watched. Even in familiar surroundings, he felt a constant fear that the trap could reopen. Authorities in the foreign country moved quickly to arrest Elena. Evidence collected from the apartment, combined with Raghav's testimony, revealed her involvement in multiple crimes, including fraud, kidnapping, and negligent deaths. The media covered the case extensively, exposing the dangers of trusting strangers online. Elena became a symbol of how digital manipulation could translate into real-world horror. Her apartment, sealed and untouched, stood as a grim reminder of the lives ruined within its walls. The legal proceedings were long and complex. Investigators worked with multiple countries to trace other victims, uncovering a pattern of luring men through fake identities and false promises. Raghav's cooperation was crucial in bringing closure to families who had been searching for answers for years. Each revelation strengthened his resolve, but it also reminded him of how fragile trust could be. Life gradually returned to a semblance of normalcy, but Raghav's worldview had changed forever. The internet, once a place of connection, now felt like a space filled with hidden dangers. He became cautious, always aware of the potential for deception. Yet despite the trauma, he carried a lesson learned the hardest way possible. Blind trust can lead to unimaginable consequences. His story became a warning to others, a testament to survival, and a chilling example of how a digital romance could turn into a nightmare.